Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. I had to say it that way just for you, Patrick.
Yep.
I'm back, and I have to kudos to Patrick and big thank you for recording the last two episodes. That was very helpful for me, and I really appreciate it. And we got some really positive feedback. People love hearing your solo perspective, from a recovered addict. And it was helpful for betrayed spouses. They said it was helpful for recovering addict spouses. So thank you for doing that. Maybe you can do it again.
Yeah. I'd love to do that. I think, when you get into recovery, and I know this is one of the tenets of 12-step, but at some point you have to start giving back in some way. And I think sometimes what happens is we go through these great healing moments and then we never talk about it again. And nobody gets to learn, not even members of our own family, or our friends or whatever, which is sometimes kind of tragic because life is full of pain and life is full of mistakes and life is full of learning too. And I remember when my grandmother passed away, she passed away at 99. And I remember at the funeral, they said, when people of that age pass away, it's like whole volumes of the library get burned. And it sounds kind of dire, but if you think about the story, I mean, certainly I've learned so much in the last 3.5 years that I never would have learned. Pain is an incredible teacher at times. But it was certainly my pleasure. And it's nice to have you back.
Thank you.
Today you're back because you finished your performance and you did really, really well. It was really cool to watch you up there. And, for those who don't know, when Kylene and I met, she was performing. So she was she was an opera singer. Yeah, she was an opera singer, and I got to watch her, and it was really cool because as we came together as a couple, I was able to really kind of be present for her and support her through that. And then we went through this process and, didn't know whether she would perform or not again, but it was nice to kind of be up there again, supporting her. It kind of harkened back to some of the early days of our relationship and being there for each other and all the little things I could do to support her through the process.
I think there were a lot of things actually, because that paralleled back, because to me, it almost felt like a coming home to that point, because when we met, I had like a lot of confidence. I was kind of like living in my era, right? I was like, this is like, I had taken time off school. I had already been divorced, all this kind of stuff. And I was coming back into my own. And I was like, I love life. I love singing. I'm getting these roles in school that I loved performing, right?
Love the opera.
I love the opera, right? It was so much fun. And the roles were just like amazing. And it was like, I was doing all this hard stuff with my voice. And it was just very cool. And so you got to kind of, like you said, support me in that. And then I decided I didn't want to pursue it as a career for reasons, it's like, it's hard. Yeah. It's hard to have a career there. And
you have to travel a lot.
You have to spend money for auditions. Yeah. I'd have to be away from you and Keegan. And we had just like gotten married and everything. And so I just sort of set that aside, but I loved singing, right? So I wanted to continue. But then the last recital I did was 2018. Then I got cancer in 2019. And then we went through Betrayal 2021. And so that was its own thing. So then going through this process, like you said, it was so cute. So I had to drive, especially the last couple weeks. They were long rehearsals, and I had to drive a distance to get there and drive a distance to get back. So I'd be getting home anywhere from like midnight to 1 o'clock. Which is essentially like 14 hours after my bedtime. Well, I'd leave the house at like 4:30 at night, and you would be coming home, or 4:30 in the afternoon, you'd be coming home. And so we were just like passing ships for a while. And so a couple of things about that were really nice. One, I was not worried at all about your sobriety. So like I was allowed and able and comfortable and safe to be in my environment and do my thing and be in my element and enjoy it and have fun and be present. And I was not worried about like what was happening when I was at home. So that was nice. But then I'd come home at like, 11 to 1 a.m. And it was so cute because he would be in bed like every single time he'd be in bed. I kind of sneak quietly in and you'd have my humidifier on next to the bed, which actually was really nice. And you'd have my water next to the bed. And then I have, this started back in college when I would have these performances. You remember I used to bake those almond butter brownies? They were gluten-free almond butter brownies. And so they were like a lot of healthy fat. And I think they're kind of low sugar because I like made them with honey or whatever. Anyway, I'd have like these huge brownies because performing takes so much energy, right? And so I'd bring them and I'd snack on them and stuff like that. And I recently found these brownies at Whole Foods that are not as healthy. But they are gluten-free, but they're full of sugar. But I was like, oh, these will be my, I loved them. And I was like, these will be my like rehearsal treats. Right. And so, yeah, I'd have like one a day and everything. And so, yeah, I'd come home and the humidifier would be on, the water would be next to my bed. You'd set the brownie next to it. It was so cute. And then I'd eat my brownie and take my supplements. If I was a shower night, I'd take the shower, and I try to go to sleep and kind of wind down. So it was really nice. And I was thinking kind of as I was going through this process, there was a period of time, I think it was after you recorded the podcasts, and kind of all this was happening and things kind of got really busy the last 2 weeks as we came into the actual performance week. And I was like, oh, it really made me like appreciate and love you more. Because you were really showing up. And one of the things about you doing the podcast was, when we started talking about this out loud, it was an agreed on thing that I would do it publicly because I have a platform and I typically coach, and that's like my my business and stuff like that. And we wanted to help people, but you weren't really interested in doing it with me. You were like, I'm going to support you. I'm on board with it, but I don't want to be in very many videos. I don't want, and I was like, okay, but like deep down, I have this idea of a podcast and like, maybe we can do that someday. And you're like, I don't know. And then you got on board. So I came out publicly with my story and I started sharing it publicly, and you were fine with that. You were supportive of that, but it was like, okay, I'm not tagging you and stuff, right? It's just my thing right now. Even though everybody knows who I am, like if they know both of us, but either way, it was a boundary, right? And I just respected that. And then you agreed to the podcast. I was like, wait, this is a big step, right? Like you're involved, but we did it together, right? And then the further we've gotten into it, the more you have led groups, the more you've done all these things, I think you're deeper and deeper into kind of what we talked about in the authenticity episode, right? At the beginning of this year, which is like, you are who you are. Everybody in our life knows it. You're more comfortable talking about it because now you're so deeply in recovery. It's like, no, this is like part of my story. And so it was actually really cool for me to have you do the podcast by yourself, because to me, that was like a huge example of deep healing. Like, I think the more into healing we get, the more it becomes a reality. Like there are no secrets, like not just between us, but like we're not presenting some false facade to the world of like who we are or what our relationship is. Like this is who we are. And if you get to know us on any level, you're probably going to figure it out because it's out there. So I loved that you did the podcast. I thought they were really good too.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It's like, you have a story to tell. You really do. And your story is important. Nobody's story is unimportant. And so, there are those of us who go through some really, really hard things. I guess all of us go through some really hard things. I mean, very few of us get through life unscathed. And then, because of the way our brains are set up, sometimes we can develop these really unhealthy coping mechanisms. And, just because it's like just because you heal, like I was talking about sharing your story, just because you heal doesn't mean that no one else is going to go through that pattern. There are people, today, and I've thought about this, like there are couples, right now as we're recording this, that discovery is happening. Right. And weekends like we had. And so, it's always easier when there's somebody that you can latch onto or talk to. And I think you're right. I think I've gotten less and less worried. I've always been a pretty confident guy, but the shame kept me, and I always like to tell my story, but the one thing. So it's nice to be able to just talk into it. And I think what I've learned, and humanity teaches me this over and over again, as humans, we respect a story where somebody has been through something hard and they've taken it and they've tried to turn it into something good.
Yeah.
And so I almost think that's a universal feeling. You know what I mean? And so that's been the response that I have gotten, from you to Keegan to, churches and people and people. I think people recognize healing and they're happy about it. They're in general, I mean, for the most part, unless you're a super, super cynical person, but that usually says more about you than it does about the healed.
I think that kind of goes into our topic today. We're going to talk about growing through the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use the example of the show that I just did. And we're going to kind of talk through like what my experience was that and how it's all connected. Your healing, my healing, our healing.
Yeah.
And, kind of what that looks like.
Yeah.
And how I think growing through the pain, and you could also say choosing the hard, is almost always beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the first part. Yes, growing through the pain, always beneficial, and choosing the hard in the right situations.
Well, they always, I'm reading this book about a long distance runner. He's an endurance athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how he's trained his mind within the first 4 seconds when he wakes up in the morning to choose the cold pool or the cold run over the
the
comfy.
first 4 seconds would be choosing to put your feet on the ground.
Yeah, right. But I think it goes upon what you're saying he's lived this incredible life because he's trained his mind to choose the hard.
Well, the reality is that, I talk to my clients about this all the time. The brain is wired for safety reasons to feel comfortable in the familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's fine if we grew up with secure attachment and nothing's ever really gone badly in our life and the familiar is a safe, comfortable, happy place. I mean, that's fine. And if you're good with that, you're good with that. But the reality is that just because something is familiar and comfortable doesn't mean it's healthy for us. And you can relate that to the addiction, for example. It was familiar and it wasn't healthy.
Right.
And we can stay in unhealthy relationships because they're familiar. It's like the devil, we make decisions because our brain is so afraid of the unknown and it's so afraid of the unfamiliar because that's not something we can control. We can only control the current state. We can't control the future. And so our brain will create all of these different stories trying to protect us, going, but what if, what if, what if, what if, what if, what if? And the only way to grow and move forward in life is to base your decisions based on the information you have right now with what's going on in your life right now. And maybe the past too, if it's an accumulation of knowledge that you've gained through a relationship with somebody, right? Like when we've talked about that too. Like when I decided there was a potential to stay with you, it was based on an accumulation of knowledge that, yes, there was this thing that you did that I didn't know about, but based on your behavior and every single other aspect that I had watched for 10 years, I knew that you were capable of doing what you said you would do and capable of doing hard things. I just needed to see you play it out. Mm-hmm. Right. But sometimes what people will do is stay in a relationship or stay in a place in their life where they're so familiar with it. They know how to manage it, but they're starting to get really uncomfortable with it. They don't like it. Right. And so we have this disconnect where it's like, well, why am I choosing this? And the answer is usually because there's a benefit to it. And the benefit a lot of the times is that it's familiar enough that you know how to manage it. And there's a deeper fear. The fear of something you don't know is stronger than the fear of managing what you do know. And so I, to some extent, I really allowed that to happen with my singing. So my nervous system was super disrupted, and we talked about that through Betrayal and everything, really, really badly. And I noticed within the first month or so, it began to manifest with my singing at church. So I used to sing like we were just talking about these difficult roles like in school and everything. And then I took a break and, but then I would do a recital, these different ways of performing in front of people. And I still did it. And then I, went through all these hard things. And I noticed that even leading hymns at church, I started to get I was afraid that I was going to pass out. My brain couldn't, I was like, I don't know if it was dissociating, like going away and then coming back, or like what was really happening, or if I was just so brain foggy, or if it was a hormone thing, or whatever it was that was happening kind of around this time.
Hmm.
But it was so bad that 2 Sundays in a row, I lost my place leading the hymns in church, which is not typically a stressful thing to do. And it's very basic sort of stuff, in terms of in relation to the things I had done before, right?
Right. Right.
And that really threw me for a loop, like messing up in front of everybody 2 weeks in a row and then having the sensation of like not, being able to pay attention to where I am, losing my place and that sort of thing. I was like, what is happening? And then as things continued and my nervous system got more and more disrupted, I just developed this extreme anxiety to the point where doing cantering, leading hymns in front of church gave me a lot of anxiety. Even singing in the choir, which is typically, you kind of hide in a choir, right? That gave me anxiety.
Hmm.
It was really bad. So then I got to a point where I was like, I've got to come back to this for me. And so I started taking lessons.
Yeah.
And that felt really good. And I remember even taking lessons with this teacher that I'd taken from before. Like I was so nervous the first couple times. And then that became more safe and more relaxed. And so we just built on that, right? And then we
Yeah.
worked on things over and over and over. And we just pulled out these different songs. And at one point, after a long time of doing lessons again, I was like, okay, I'm pulling out the hard stuff. I'm pulling out the stuff that like my whole career I have avoided because I've been afraid of it. And then I started tackling those. And then I would learn how to hit those notes, and I would learn how to do this hard thing and this hard technique and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, right? So there's a point at which you have to actually actively choose to do the hard thing. And I've mentioned this before. It's very important in recovery to know when there's a difference between plowing through something that is unsafe and knowing when it is safe and you're just uncomfortable doing it.
As you're telling this story, it makes me laugh a little bit. So we watched the 1960s version of The Unsinkable Molly Brown, and it's those silly moments from like and it's physically abusive, but there's a scene where like she's hysterical and her husband like slaps her across the face, and then she's on the Titanic lifeboat and a woman's being hysterical and she slaps the woman across the face. And I don't mean to make light of any sort of physical abuse, but it's just funny. It's those old kind of mindsets. Like I couldn't have grabbed you by the shoulders and go to a thing. Like you had to go through
Mhm.
this process of
I was
just
actually doing that to
exposing.
myself.
Right. You had to expose
Yeah.
yourself to a lesson. Right.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
is it a form of exposure therapy that I
right,
was
right.
choosing to do for
Yeah.
myself?
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
it's like you can't, sometimes people go, what's the class? Oh, just get over it, right? Well, you can't.
Yeah.
It takes time. And there may have been a point, and luckily you were able to get to a certain point, but there could have been something where there was a significant block that you might have had to work through from a
Right.
therapeutic or coaching standpoint.
Well, I think what you were saying is like I was doing that myself. I was taking myself by the shoulders and shaking me and going,
Mhm.
this is important to you and you have to find a way. Also, I realized at the point that I took lessons again, I was really feeling the need that I needed to I was so deep in the world of betrayal and depression and anxiety at that point. I was like, I have to engage in something that brings me joy.
Mhm.
And even though I had nerves around this, I knew that it was something that could and would and did bring me joy. And so I kept building on that. And then what I was mentioning was there's a difference between um pushing yourself through something just to push through it and it's actually not the right time,
Mhm.
and knowing that something is safe and you're just nervous or it's uncomfortable when it is safe. And we talked a lot about that in our episodes around rebuilding sexuality after betrayal. There is a time and place where it's not the right time to push past a step or push through a boundary or push through a safety thing that you've set up. It's not right and you need more time.
Right. Yeah.
The safety has to be there and it has to be established. You have to have a foundation that's secure enough that you can trust yourself to know I am safe. But kind of like when I was like, okay, I'm going to pull out this aria, right? I didn't do that the first lesson. I was like, I have to feel comfortable singing in front of this person again.
Mhm.
I have to feel comfortable with my own voice again. I have to work through some of my physiological stuff and kind of get, warm in my voice again and familiar with really doing some of these things again.
Mhm.
And then months or maybe even a year into it. I don't know when we did it. I was like, okay, I'm going to pull out this really hard aria with this one section that I would avoid that aria for the longest time because I had to go up. I had to go up to, I think it's like a B flat, and I had to do it. I had to sustain it and sing it quietly.
Mhm.
And that was always hard for me. It was always really hard for me. If you want me to bounce up there and pop it and like do a staccato and da, 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 I can do that, no problem.
Mhm.
But if you want me to like hold it and make it sound pretty like a bell and like, okay, that's hard, right? And so I just wouldn't do it.
Mhm.
I didn't do it for years.
Yeah.
And I would avoid it. And so I finally pulled it out and I was like, all right, let's work on this. And I would fail. And it would be horrible. And I just did it crappy like a bajillion times.
Mhm.
And then one day I did it. And literally, as soon as I did it, I was like, gosh. And I actually like have it like recorded because I record parts of my lessons and stuff. And both me and my teacher were like, oh, gosh, that was amazing.
Mhm.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, okay, now let's see if we can do it again. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my point in sharing all this is even through all this, I got more and more comfortable with my own voice. I got more and more comfortable with, okay, like I've got it back. I can do these things. I love singing again. I had almost completely resigned myself to the idea that maybe I would need to set up a private recording studio in our home and just record my own music and record different songs and stuff like that, because still performing in public just caused extreme anxiety.
Mhm.
And I was kind of, to an extent, resigned to that fact.
Yeah.
So here's where I think we can pull it into recovery and into on both sides of the aisle. Sometimes community, and we've mentioned this so frequently, but sometimes it's community that really helps you to that next level. So sometimes it's you having the vision and going, it is safe, I'm just uncomfortable, but in order to achieve my goals in life and to grow and to be the person that I want to be and to have integrity and authenticity and do the thing, like I need to do it.
Mhm.
And other times it's somebody else coming alongside you and going, I know you can do it.
Right.
And for me, vocally, there have been a lot of times in my life where someone has gone, I know you can do it.
Yeah.
And that was actually the impetus for me to try.
Yep.
So I remember when I was like literally 15, and it was at my old church, and the music director there, we were doing Handel's Messiah or pieces of it for like a Christmas thing. And so one of the hardest solo pieces for that is Rejoice Greatly. It's got a bunch of melismas. For soprano, they're like right over your breaks. So you have to like learn how to do them correctly so that you're not the breath is hard, the placement is hard, like all of it is hard. Okay, the whole thing is hard.
Mhm.
Like any soprano that ever does it will be like, yeah, it's really hard. And so I go in and I audition with like a different aria that's much easier, like way easier, right? And I'm like, I would really like to participate in this, but I'm going to choose this thing over here. Literally comes back and he's like, "Oh, you're going to do the Rejoice Greatly." And I was like, "But I don't want to do it."
No, thank you.
He's like, "But you can do it." And you will.
Yeah.
The exact conversation. But that was basically it. It was like, "No, you're going to do it." And I was like,
Mhm.
"Okay." It was the fact that he thought I could do it, gave me an opportunity. I practiced it like every day leading up to that. So it was so comfortable in my voice. And then it came to singing in front of church and I did it. I
Mhm.
remember, and probably as a 15-year-old, it sounded the way it sounded, but I did it
Yeah.
and I did it well. And then this was the same situation. So I was just kind of doing my thing, like going to lessons, enjoying the stuff. And then my teacher's like, "Hey, there's this audition coming up and I think it would be great for you." Now I ended up going out for something else. And I think that was a better fit for me. But it was her putting that in my head and basically being like, "I think you're ready." It's the subtext is like, "I think you're ready. I think you should do this. And you can do this," right? That to me is kind of what I hear from it. So I started kind of thinking about the show that she had told me about, and then I saw this other audition, and I auditioned for it, and I got the role.
Yeah.
But I think, did I mention this already? I don't want to like I think maybe I've already said this, so I don't have to say it again. But the audition itself was like panic inducing
Oh
for
yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was panic inducing,
Mhm.
but I did it, and so I was kind of resolved to the idea of, okay, again, that's like the step. I took the step. So it was panic inducing and I'm going to be happy that I did it. That was kind of my mindset, like going into it.
You're talking about something, sometimes having the power of belief You don't necessarily have it in yourself, but others do. And I think so many of us are told because of others wounding and things like that that you won't be able to do that, or maybe you should think of doing something less. And so when you can speak to somebody and say, hey, I think you can do this, you got this. One of the things I always try to do with the new men every time they come into the program, say, hey, I'm confident you can do this.
Yep.
And so probably for the first time in their life is, maybe that's the first time they've heard somebody say that, to them. And so, I think about, you had people speak into that with you. I know I was confident you could get there. But it probably had to be more than just me that said it to you
Yeah.
because of what had happened between us. So, in your own lives, think about how you're speaking to your kids. Think about how you're, you know what I mean? Like,
Speaking to yourself.
yeah, speaking to yourself. So
What do you
you're
think you
right.
can
Yeah.
actually accomplish in your life? And I think
Yeah.
that leads us into a really good point about this whole journey, this whole thing about growing through the pain is don't settle. And we can apply that to many aspects of recovery in betrayal, in addiction, and even the coupleship. It's like don't settle in your relationship on either side. Just I think we see so many examples of
Mhm.
people settling in life, and we've all done it to some extent. But if you are unhappy, look at where you are settling.
Right. Right.
Period. Like you don't have to stay there. Nobody has to stay in the exact same place in their life, mentally, emotionally, physically,
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so one of the things I think that was so incredibly rewarding about this was that reminder because like I said, I was kind of at the point of like, okay, well, I'm just gonna have to settle to sing behind a screen. I
Mhm.
can pre-record it, make sure it sounds fine to me, post it on the internet, do a recording for a CD for Christmas, whatever. But doing it live in a vulnerable place with an audience, like no, like that's not. I'm just gonna have to settle for less than that.
I was actually thinking about when you were going through rehearsal, how you were talking negatively to yourself. And like, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I'm just laughing about it as we're talking about it now. For the first time you sang in front of people, I think like nothing happened or whatever. But then at the rehearsals, so you were like, I don't know, what does that mean? I don't think they like it. And then I think one time only like the young kids told you were amazing. So you were like, that doesn't mean as much. You know what I mean?
True. No,
No, I know that, but like I could hear it in you a little bit. You were kind of talking yourself
no, what was
down.
happening was I was working through stages of my anxiety.
Mhm.
So I had to do the audition, which was, like I said, panic inducing. It was just really terrible for me physically, but vocally it wasn't horrible. But it wasn't what I would like to present to people because of the level of anxiety that I was singing through, right? Then we started doing music rehearsals. So I had to sing in front of people and there would be different groups of people and I had to do it. And then it was again extreme anxiety. I was getting concerned. I was like, I'm not breathing well, which is
Mhm.
important for this type of
Mhm.
music. You can hear it. It impacts how I sing. I was doing it, I was singing through it, but it wasn't great.
Yeah.
And I was concerned that okay, am I just going to be doing this whole thing through this massive wall of anxiety? And I was ready to do it, right? But then it was so step by step, right? We had the music rehearsals and we just kept going. And I started to get, there was one day, this is where the don't settle and pushing yourself when it's safe and doing the hard thing and don't get discouraged and all this kind of stuff kind of comes in. Reframing, right? This is why coaching is really important, or group support, or mentorship, or whatever it is, your therapist. Like all of these things are so important through this process. I was driving. Well, I would kind of like leave my friends these voice notes like after rehearsal and stuff. I kind of keep them apprised of the process. Hey, we did this tonight. Hey, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna work on this tonight. Da da da. This is how it's going. Blah blah blah. Well, one of my best friends, her husband has been on Broadway and has an extensive acting and musical history, and so he was sending me some voice notes with like thoughts around, oh my gosh, I agree with you. Because what I was noticing was when I was singing a solo, I get extremely nervous. It's like, oh, it's all about me, right? And all eyes are on me, and it's important that I do well. If I was singing a duet, I was way more calm. And it was like, oh, I just need to be a support for this person. And if they are nervous, it's like I'm even more calm because I have to be a calming, supportive presence. And I can do that. I can show up for that person. I can be grounded. I can, do this. And so I was thinking about, so I had this input from my friend's husband, and then I was like processing all of this experience. I was like, why is that I'm so much more calm when I'm doing something with somebody else? And then it just like clicked in my head one day when I was on the way to rehearsal. I was like, okay, you are just a piece of the puzzle. So even if you are singing a solo, it's not all about you. You doing well makes everybody else on the team look good. So even if it's just you singing, you are a reflection and a puzzle piece to everybody else doing well. So it's like I could take on that feeling of I'm supporting the team, I'm part of the team
Mhm.
that I have when I'm like with singing with everybody or with one person or with a group or whatever, that I could take out on when I was doing my solo.
Right.
And for whatever reason, that clicked super deeply with me. And it was like better and better and better and better from then. And so then I would sing in front of the group, and then we would go to the performance center and I would sing in front of the group there. And then I would sing in front of the orchestra. And then I would sing with the microphone and the orchestra and the lights. And then eventually
Mhm.
with an audience.
Yeah.
And so that was like, when I started experiencing that, that was like a huge revelation to me. And it was like I had epiphany after epiphany after epiphany going through this process. And it was like, again, like I was ready and mentally prepared to like never experience that. And what I ended up experiencing in the end was so much better than I could have anticipated. I was living in this black and white world vocally, and I ended up in this world full of color.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was so cool because the 3 performances that we had, I would get a little nervous before I'd, like, get on stage, right? Like, the
Yeah,
the
sure.
the performance nerves are still there, but, like, in a healthy way, in the way that you hear good performers have, where it's like you're buzzed up, you're ready to go,
Yeah.
but then you get on stage.
Adrenaline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in a good way, but then you get on stage and you start doing what you've practiced and rehearsed and you calm down.
Mhm.
For me, that was, like, the most healing thing. It was like this whole process was a tremendously healing experience. And to get on stage and sing in front of people and be vocally relaxed and not anxious and not panicking so that I could actually sing the way that I want people to hear me sing,
Mhm.
as opposed to forcing myself to sing through the discomfort or being nervous enough that it impacts my sound or whatever. I realized that I think for this may be the first time in my life, even with all the performing that I did before, that this may have been the first time I truly was like present, focused, engaged, in the moment, relaxed, enjoying myself through a performance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
So it's like, I almost missed that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you would not have had that experience, that's it's almost like a finish line feeling, right, of all the hard work you went through, that feeling that you get as you approach the finish line. In this case, figuratively, it was the performances, right? And so all the hard work had been done at rehearsals and all of that stuff, and thinking it through and working with people and having all your friends support you and give you different perspectives. What your friend's husband did was he reframed your role in the production from this sole individual to, hey, you're part of a team and the team relies on you and you have to support them as much as they will support you. So all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay. Okay, that's great. That's great. It was really interesting, and I don't know if I should go into this yet, but it was really interesting sitting in the audience that first night and being so nervous for you, which I was like, oh my gosh, I remember getting so nervous for you when you would perform. And then seeing you come out and sing that, and then thinking about all the events and all the conversations we've had through the years, and all the nervousness and anxiety that you had and everything, and knowing like in that moment, and you absolutely crushed it. And I was so proud of you. And just knowing how hard of a process that was to get through, but you did it. You really did it. And then 2 successive nights, you did it even better, right? It just got even better. So it was,
3. I
yeah,
don't even
yeah. So
count. Yeah.
that's what healing is. That's what healing is to go
Yeah.
step into that. And I think you said something in there as you were talking about, like, you don't know what's on the other side of hard.
Right.
You know what I mean? And most of the time, I think all the time, what's on the other side of hard, if you're moving through something, is victory. And
Mhm.
victories are really, you can't really put words to it. You really, it's hard
That's
to
yeah.
kind of, describe it fully other than that feeling. And when you got it, right?
Mhm.
You really know when you have it.
That's how I felt the last performance.
Yep.
Is yeah, the indescribable sort of it was like, I gotta make sure that I'm, like, present and I was so enjoying that
Enjoying
performance.
it.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
loving it so much. I was just, like, soaking every little bit of it, and then curtain call came, and we were already emotional behind stage. Last performance, it's the king and I, so the king is dying in the last scene, we're all like, "Ah," and then it just, like, was such an overwhelming feeling of everything that you just mentioned.
Mhm.
The culmination of healing, I had been totally aware and realizing how much had shifted for me the past month as this all happened, and so appreciative the whole time. But it was like this flood of emotions, flood of over. I was literally crying
There you are. Yep.
while I was bowing, and people that I knew were there, and they're like, "Yeah, we could totally see you crying." But I was just so grateful, and it like hit me when I went out. I had done it 100% the way I could do it
Yeah. Yeah.
to the best of my ability, truly. And that last day that I went out and heard the audience like increase for
Mhm.
me when I went for my bow,
Yeah.
and it was like, that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. And then I was like,
Oh,
ah.
yeah, they have that phrase, leave it all on the field or leave it all on
Yeah.
the stage or whatever, and I think you did. I
Yeah.
think that's, you didn't go, "Gosh, I really wish I had been more open. I wish I
Mhm.
had done this, or I wish I had done that." And I'd say it was like you picked the right production for that. It was, incredibly well done. I've heard people go, "Felt like I was on Broadway." Like,
Mhm.
it was really, really well done. So it was like and,
That's another piece to it, right? Like, oh
yeah.
my gosh, I can't believe I got in this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean, it was such a really, really cool thing, and to see all the people come to support you, like you had so many friends each night coming, and it's interesting. I was reflecting on this later. I was like, there were friends that had come from Betrayal. There was
Yep.
somebody from one of your NLP classes. There was
Yep.
somebody from one of your support groups. You know what I mean? And like,
I know, it was like our old church, our current church,
yeah,
neighbors,
mhm,
yeah, just like literally every walk of life. That was another piece that was so overwhelming to me. I was like,
yeah,
"Oh my gosh, like they came for me,
yeah,
and they were
yeah,
here and they traveled." That was the thing. It was a bit of a drive.
yeah. It
It
wasn't
was a long
close.
show. If anybody's seen the movie, it's a long show.
Yeah, it does go on. Saturday night was hard for me. I was getting tired.
All tired
Sunday, I
driving.
was good though. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But no, it was incredible. And I think this really isn't about singing.
No.
It's about fear and moving through pain and
It
healing.
it reiterated to me the thing that I realized through this was so crazy to me to think about, was for a long time I was like, well, betrayal, I don't know if you want to say it this way, but more or less ruined my voice, right? Like it caused my
Yeah.
anxiety, it ruined my nervous system. And so it was the source of a lot of the problems that I had for the past couple years performing, right? And I was kind of stuck on that. And then I went through this process and I was like, oh my gosh, had I not gone through betrayal, I may not have had the tools and the courage to push through the walls that I had, that not only took me back to where I was, but broke that level and took me to that next
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what I realized when I was thinking about relating this to healing and don't settle and pushing through and growing through the pain and all this kind of stuff was, no, never would we ever wish betrayal on anyone. But the reality is it's happening every day. And when it does, we have a choice. We can be miserable forever. We can be bitter. We can be angry. We can stay stuck in the middle and settle and just manage our lives and live as friends or get divorced, or, all these different things, right? And sometimes divorce is the right decision. That's the
Right.
freeing thing to do.
That's right.
Right. But there's a lot of like things in the middle where it's like we can decide to just stay on this level because it's familiar and it's less painful than it was a year ago. And I think about this so often, like with our story, every year. It's so funny. Every year I'm like, oh man, the year before that sucked. But the year that I was in it, I was like, oh yeah, we're doing pretty good. Right. And so I think
Yeah.
that's like the flag for everybody that I want to throw up, is like, just because you feel like you've made progress, you should celebrate that. You should be glad about that, but you shouldn't stop. I think that's the thing I want to tell you is like there's so many when I talk to my clients, I talk a lot about stair steps. Okay. So like recovery, I think life, and this is why I think you should never stop. It's personal growth, relational growth,
Mhm.
reconciliation, trust, all of these things, long term, lifelong. That doesn't mean you're going to be living in pain. Like I wouldn't say we've been living in active pain for a really long time,
Right, right.
but it gets better and better and better and better. And why? Because you don't stay on the stair step. So when I think about recovery, a lot of times I think about, okay, going up is hard. You're using your muscles, you're pushing up, right? Growth is uncomfortable, even when it's the right growth for you.
Right, right.
Then, after you've done that hard thing, you sit on the platform for a minute and you're like, okay, I'm cool with this. Gosh, this year feels better than last year. We're good. Right, I'm not constantly triggered. I'm not constantly worried about I'm relapsing, like all this kind of stuff. Like maybe we're just going to stay here, but maybe there's like some stuff we're not really good at yet.
Mhm.
Right, and you're like, this is what I think is healthy, is eventually as time progresses you hit the back of the next stair and you have that intuition, that inner knowing, that knowledge of what I was talking about earlier. It's safe. Me staying here at this point is only because I'm choosing the comfortable, not because it's the right thing to do. Right. And so that's where you have a choice to make. You can stay on that platform because it's familiar, it's comfortable, you know how to manage it, it feels better than it used to feel. Or you can go, I want more for my life.
Mhm.
I'm happy we're here, but it's not good enough forever. And we're going to keep going. And that's the next stair step. And there's significant phases of that, I think, through couples reconciliation and through individual recovery. And those stairs might spread out as time progresses, right? Or they might speed up depending on,
Yeah,
which version you
yeah.
take. Um, but I think the point of that is it continues throughout life. What's the next thing?
Right,
I don't
right.
think there will ever be a time, maybe in our 80s, when it's just like enjoy life and you've done all the hard things, right? But for most of our lives, I think it's like, okay, what's the next thing that's going to challenge our mind, that's going to challenge our personal growth, that's going to help us grow in wisdom or empathy or relational development or coaching or leadership or whatever it is in our lives, or a hobby that we have, or whatever.
Mhm,
There's always
mhm.
something. And so that's my challenge, is like, we don't have to stay stuck mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. We don't have to stay stuck relationally. We don't have to settle for something less than we think we want or that
Mhm.
we deserve. And just because it's hard does not mean that it's not doable.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I always I tell this story at work, and I don't know if it's true, but I'm pretty sure it's true that Clint Eastwood learned how to play piano in his 70s. And so like if you think about, how many people pick up piano in their 70s? You know what I mean? So it kind of goes to that point. So, I know you're talking about the stair step approach, and that's very relevant. I know Ted Roberts describes healing as a loop. It keeps coming back on itself. So the forward part of the loop is you healing, and then there's going to be
Mhm.
something, and you don't know where you are on that loop, but each loop that comes around you're moving a little bit further towards healing.
Well, I think
And
an important part of that analogy is on the back end of that. You feel like you're falling and like you're going backwards.
right,
But
right.
the reality is it's like a stretched out slinky. You keep going forward.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you keep going, and so you're right, it's like you don't know, growth is uncomfortable. Growth and we've laughed about this with, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It's not the best thing that ever happened to me, but with you, I don't, I feel, I had somebody telling me the other day that they've always been like, you've always been a real empathetic boss, and this person knows the story,
Yeah.
but he's like, you really show up more empathetically with us as employees
Mhm.
now, and you really, can kind of help us through things and navigate. And I would have never gotten there before.
Yeah.
I would have had my own. I was overly reactive to situations. My ego was easily hurt. Now
Mhm.
I'm like, I don't care. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, well, at such point that my value is no longer relevant to the company, well, then maybe it's time to move on.
Mhm.
But and that's okay. You know what I mean? And so yeah, healing is a what does Keegan call it? His arc or whatever, when he's like working out
Oh,
my villain arc, or he calls it his villain arc. Um, So, but I think it's like, I think arc is kind of a good,
Superhero.
yeah, superhero arc, or my change
Origin
arc,
story.
origin story, yeah, whatever. So it's just, something changes and you have to kind of start moving
Yeah, you have an uncomfortable catalyst, right?
right. Yeah.
We all have this journey means that we've all had an uncomfortable catalyst.
Right. Right. Yeah.
The reality of that, though, is that we get to choose what we do with it. And I can say, I mentioned divorce a minute ago, the same thing happened when I chose divorce, because in that situation, it was the right decision. And I moved on and I liked my life more and I enjoyed it more. And I went back to school and I
Right.
was doing all of these things. And I was like, this is great. And my life became happier and I grew again and I changed again. And so divorce for me was awesome and a great catalyst at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah.
And reconciliation, even though that's a longer, more painful process, ended up doing the same thing for me, because in this particular situation, it was the right choice for us. And so the end result still ended up in growth and joy. And so I think we can relate this idea to all of the sides, the reconciliation side, the betrayal side, right? It's like women that are betrayed can stay stuck a lot of times.
Mhm.
And there's ends of the spectrum, right? They can stay stuck in anger or bitterness or victimhood to an extent, because it gives them the right to feel angry, right? And so if I stay a victim, it means that I'm allowed to have unhealthy responses long term to my life and to my relationship. The addict can have very unhealthy uh, stuck points as well. Like, well, it's it's better than it was, therefore I don't really need to get into full recovery, right?
Right.
Like I'm satisfied where I am right now. This stair step is comfortable for me. Um, it used to be so much worse, right? There's a qualification there. Well,
Mhm.
it's not this, but they're so stuck because they're not living a life of actual recovery. And I did a video about this the other day that really seemed to resonate with both betrayed partners and addicts. And it was this idea that addiction is like, I related it to like eating cake. So, like an addict, if you're trying to figure out, like, okay, how can I trust an addict getting into recovery? It's like, well, think about somebody that went to a store bought sugary sweet cake um, all the time, and they became addicted to this cake, and then they discovered, like, hey, this releases certain chemicals in my brain and it medicates this anxiety, just as an example. And that's the only thing I've really found that can do that. And so I keep coming back to it, and eventually over time, like, I hate this cake, I don't even like the taste of it anymore, I'm gaining weight, I have brain fog, I hate myself for going to this all the time, but I can't stop eating it. I don't even like the flavor of it anymore, I'm so tired of it, but I can't stop eating it, right? And so then they try to stop and they can't. And they try to diet and they can't. And they probably go on a, let's say, a binge purge cycle, right?
Mhm.
I tried.
Mhm.
Oh, now I can't do it. I'm going to eat the whole cake this time because I'm going to stop again tomorrow, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that's the addict pattern. That's an example that we can maybe relate to a little bit in terms of understanding it.
Mhm.
But then they get into something like Whole 30, and they're provided tools, resources, accountability, support, community, all of these things that we're talking about in recovery, right? And for the first time, they give up cake. And then they start to notice that, oh my gosh, blueberries taste amazing, when they actually taste sweeter than ever. And almonds taste kind of sugary almost. And I've never tasted an almond that's kind of sugary, and but it's because they were eating cake and they didn't realize how good these other things
Mhm.
tasted, right?
Mhm.
So they went from this true deep belief that this cake is the best thing that I can have, because in their life experience, it was the only thing that answered this question. It was the only thing that provided this end result. It's the only thing that medicated X. It's the only thing that gave them this solution,
Mhm.
this benefit, until they were connected to people, support, tools, resources, accountability that proved and gave them testimonials and examples of how this other thing is actually really, really good if you do XYZ, and will help you through it, because it's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's difficult. You're going to detox from the sugar,
Mhm.
right? And then they do it and they're like, whoa, this is so much better. My brain feels clear. I've lost weight.
Right.
I feel, and I get the same chemical rush from these other foods, but without the edge, without the discomfort, without the pain of the guilt, the shame, the hating myself, all of these different things. I just feel clearer. I feel better. Right. And so I think that's a great example of when we're in the thing, whoever you are, the addict, the betrayed partner, a human being, when we're in the thing and we're choosing familiarity, it's like you're in this cornfield and you cannot see what is around you. And if you were just simply able to have a map or get a drone and look above, you would realize there's this huge world around you. And you can think of it, you're living in black and white. And there's a world that is a spectrum of color out there. And we just don't know.
Mhm.
And so I think it's if you know it's out there, believe in yourself that you can do it. If you are struggling with the concept that something else can be better, that like be around those people that can tell you that can insert that belief, that can encourage you, that can support you, that can maybe hand you the map, that can tell you the things, that can share the stories, right? And that's kind of what we try to do with this podcast is be like, it is possible. Like, and we have, I don't think really at any period of time over the past 3 plus, we're in the fourth year of recovery. We're working on the fourth year of recovery. There's never really been a time where we've just stopped for a long period of time. We're always doing something
Mhm.
else, moving forward in some
Individually or
way.
as a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we're hoping to do is give you that map, give you that encouragement. And, sometimes we have to do it for ourselves too. And that was kind of
Mhm.
what
Yeah.
this experience was for me was as a huge reminder of, oh my gosh, like you really can do hard things. The hard things you've accomplished have allowed you to have the tools and the resources and the skill set to actually do this.
Absolutely.
And this ended up so much better than I could have ever, ever, ever anticipated. It was just so, I was like so full of joy, like the whole time I was doing this. I was like, this is amazing, this is so
Yeah.
awesome. And just so full of gratitude afterwards, right? I was like,
Yeah.
and that was kind of hitting me too. I was like, the idea of how addicts like think what they're living in is the best, and then they try something new and realize, oh, this is so much better. I feel like I could really relate through this process
Mhm.
where I was like, oh well, this is just the way things are, and then I made it to the other side and I was like, whoa, this is so much better. And so it was like a really good reminder for me too as I went through all this.
Yeah. I was actually thinking as you were talking that first Christmas after discovery, so it was 11 months in, they asked you to sing Silent Night and you got lost and you had a hard time. I think it was Silent Night
Oh,
or
holy night.
Oh Holy Night. Yeah, which is, for you, it's about the most simple, easy thing in the world. It's meaningful as a hymn or as a song, but it was hard for you. And I remember being like, wow, I felt really, of course I felt responsible and all of those things. And so you're right. And it wasn't, you didn't go out the next month and try out for the King and I. It was years and it was a lot of healing and learning how to do different things and approach things differently and stuff like that and being able to stand up on that stage and not only blow away what could be a comparable oh holy night. I mean you just really showed up well, so great job, really proud of you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think what might be a great way to kind of wrap this up is with an exercise that you can do at home. And I think so. There's a couple. One would be like maybe a timeline where you kind of draw it in a stair step fashion and you give yourself a little bit of a perspective of where you were when you found everything out, where you are. If you'd like to keep going, maybe that's enough for you right now. If you'd like to keep going, maybe pencil in some things of the stair steps that you want to do next. What does that look like, right? Because I talk to my clients a lot about just having this vision of like what you want your life to look like. So that's one exercise. So just draw a little stair step and maybe what are like the big milestones that you've accomplished individually or as a couple as you go through this? That could be a really encouraging thing. Because sometimes when we feel really discouraged, it's helpful to turn around, look back and go, I'm not where I was 6 months ago. And
Hmm.
so that's helpful. And if I've done that, then I can turn around and I can do another 6 months and keep going on that trajectory. The other thing, the other exercise I would recommend is I want you to visualize a time in your life where you felt the most aligned, the most confident, the most true to you, the happiest, the most joyful. Just like what was a time in life where you were like, You liked your friends, you were hanging around positive people. Maybe you were engaged in something that felt really good. Like for me, we were talking about, when you and I got together, I was really engaged in singing, and I had gone through my divorce, and I was feeling really good, and like I felt really comfortable with who I was and that sort of thing, right? So a time in your life, was it high school? Was it college? Was it sometime earlier in your marriage? Like a time where you just felt good. And I want you to itemize, like, who are the people you were spending time with? What were the habits you were engaged with? Were there certain hobbies or activities? Were you going to like a yoga class on Tuesdays that made you feel really good? Were you taking walks in the afternoon? Like, did that make you feel good? Were you listening to music more regularly or playing in a band? Or like, what was it that you were doing at that point in your life that made you just feel good? Were you reading more books? Were you listening to podcasts? Like, what were you doing? And just really itemize it out. And then on another piece or in another column, just think through like, where are you now? And what from that list would be helpful to bring in? What from that list would bring a little bit more joy, a little bit more creativity, a little more authenticity, a little more just like, this is who I am, and I'm going to reconnect to that. I'm going to bring that part of myself back up to the surface. Because part of healing, especially on the betrayed side, is really remembering who you are and getting more and more comfortable with that and grounded in that, and just feeling like I'm feeling more grounded, right? And that like that part of your soul is free to express itself. And so that would be a really good exercise too. It's like, what did I feel like then? And what can I bring into my life now that will help me continue on my recovery journey?
Yeah.
All right. We hope that's helpful. Thanks for listening. It's good to be back. Thanks for holding down the fort, Patrick.
You're welcome.
And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.